And we're live.
Hello, everyone. This is Carrie Johnson with the Iowa Department of Management. And today we are going to be talking about some of the updates and changes and just general overview of the county budget process for fiscal year 25. So yesterday, we did one that was geared more towards beginners in that I provided more background regarding county finances in general, as well as, sort of funds and expenditure classes, some of the more, um, basic information about county government. This session is really going to focus on, an overview of the process in general, and then specifically to fiscal 25, show some highlights of the budget system for fiscal 25 and kind of focus on that. But if you attended yesterday's session, some of this information is going to be repeated. So just sort of a heads up. I don't want anyone to waste their time if they feel they got enough information yesterday. It's basically going to be a subset of what I did yesterday today. In addition to, it is really geared towards those people that are doing the budget, county auditors and staff, county budget folks and staff. So it's going to be, showing the Department of Management online system that's used and talking about things that get a little bit into the weeds. So just sort of a heads up there, just to make sure that, again, folks are getting kind of what they expect out of the presentation. Joining me today, I have Amanda Waskey, our auditor that's in Ringgold County, and she's going to help by monitoring the chat and sort of, prompting me with questions as we go. We'll definitely, answer any pertinent questions sort of as the discussion comes up. She's free to just sort of stop me and say, hey, Carrie, somebody asked this question, might as well address it right now. And then also, hopefully, we'll have some time at the end. If there's any remaining questions, we can address those. Certainly, you can contact me at any time with questions you might have. And everyone should have my contact information, but it will be included as the last slide. So I think that's it for sort of the sort of procedural information for today's presentation. The slides are available for folks. I know ISAC was going to make sure those were available, on their website. And, again, if anyone wants anything from me document-wise, just let me know. Anything I missed, Amanda, you could think of?
So just pop your questions in the Q&A below, and I'm monitoring those. And like Carrie said, we'll do our best to answer them. There were a few yesterday during the session that we don't have answers to, and we're researching those. So I'm writing them down. So as the session goes on, we'll track those and get responses to everybody. And the Q&A chat is being archived. So that's also going to be sent out with the training video and Carrie's slides. So that information will be available too. And like Carrie said, this session is really more geared towards the auditors for performing or budget directors. The event accidentally got sent out to all affiliates, so we apologize for that. We don't want to create confusion for anybody. And yeah, we'll do our best to answer the questions. Again, this is just us ensuring that we all can administer the code as House File 718 was written. So if we know that there are things that don't line up correctly, and we really are working behind the scenes to get some of those issues addressed.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And again, folks, this is a budgeting update. It's really focused on the county budget, although I might, make some comments about city budgeting and that sort of thing as we go through. But in general, it's really focused on the county budget and the process, and then, what's changed or updated as we move into the next fiscal year's budget. So as far as the agenda for this presentation, I'm going to start out with the budget timelines and everyone's role, just sort of reminders of what part the different pieces of the county play in this whole process. I am going to walk through the process, and then at the end, we'll go through, those steps in the online budget software. If you've done the budget, in prior years or recent years in the online system, it's pretty similar. You'll find that, the steps are pretty similar, but obviously with the new law changes, some things will look different. So we'll go ahead and talk about the process and general timelines first, just as a reminder. Obviously, we've moved past the fall, but you all know that during the falls when discussions are happening regarding spending policies, potential projects, maybe labor negotiations, etc. And then in November or December, the auditor or budget staff often furnishes budget worksheets out to folks to kind of help generate that thought process and those data points that are needed as we look towards the next fiscal year's budget. The County Compensation Board, of course, meets prior to the budget being adopted to recommend those salary changes for elected officials. An item that folks are working on right now, because I get lots of questions about it right now, is certifying those valuations. So certifying the taxable valuations for usage in the fiscal 25 budget. So folks are working on those 2023 valuations right now. And of course, as before, those are due by January 1. County departments then submit proposed expenditures and revenue by January 15th. And then on or before January 20th, the auditor or other official, that works with the budget, what have you, compiles that information and gives it over to the board. The next step sort of in the formal process, statutory process, is the notice of proposed tax is published. And that notice is for a hearing that's held on that proposed tax. This is the new piece via House File 718. So that hearing notice is published not less than 10, no more than 20 days before the date of the hearing. And then also a mailing is sent to taxpayers for that hearing. That notice also tells taxpayers about their school budget hearing. And then if they're in the city, their city budget hearing, and then also provides some more informational pieces that we'll talk about later. Of course, that hearing is held, giving an opportunity for those folks in the county to express their happiness or concern regarding that budget. After that point, the board would then set the hearing date for the regular budget hearing notice. And so that, of course, is taking a look at the full budget of the county, both revenues and tax and expenditure side. So that is not changed from prior years. That looks the same. We hold that budget hearing, and then after the hearing, the board would adopt the budget by resolution, and that would all need to be certified now by April 30th, pushing back that deadline because of the new required steps. Citizens have until May 10th now to file a budget protest. County auditors, of course, certified the county budget and all other local government budgets. Department of Management certifies property tax rates out to county auditors. County auditors pass along the tax list to county treasurers so they can provide those tax statements. And then the Board of Supervisors would appropriate by resolution the amounts for the different officers and departments for that fiscal year. So that's sort of, our big picture. These are all the statutory steps and requirements that happen during the process, starting, of course, right now and going up until right before the fiscal year actually begins. And then just a quick sort of overview and a reminder about everyone's role in the process. So Department of Management, we provide the forms. So we provide those budget forms, we provide instructions, we'll provide technical assistance to assist throughout that budget process. If you're not aware, the county resource page is where you go on the Department of Management's website to find all the different pieces of information you need from us. And that is unchanged. It's dom.iowa.gov/counties. So that's where you'd go to find a variety of pieces of information, including, logging into the website and various documents and all that good stuff. So that's our role at sort of the beginning of the process. County departments, of course, their role is to submit those department estimates. So they estimate their expenditures and then also provide an estimate of their revenues other than property tax. So we know that in many cases, property tax is intended to fill that gap between, what revenues there are other than property tax and the expenditures. Sort of to fill that hole is what property tax would provide. So departments would let you know, of course, their anticipated expenditures and what other types of revenue they would be bringing in during the fiscal year. And then, of course, as I said before, the auditor or another official would pull all that information together and provide that to the board for their review. The board, then your board of supervisors would obviously consult with departments, maybe have budget workshops or meetings where various departments' requests are discussed. They prepare that budget with the county auditor and budget staff. Your board of supervisors are going to set those hearing dates, those 2 hearing dates. They're going to conduct the actual public hearings and accept those comments from your citizens. Once the budget is ready, they would approve the full budget by resolution and then, of course, appropriate those monies by department by resolution once the budget is in its final state.
Hey, Carrie.
Yeah.
Real quick, I've just had a couple of questions come in. I just want to let everybody know with regard to what can be spent within each fund. I know we are all going to have to get very creative this year because of the limitations on our basic funds. I will share that code section that lists specifically what can be paid from each fund. That's one thing the Iowa Code actually does do pretty well, is list out what is allowable with each one of those funds. And I can get that sent out to everybody that lists those that are allowed.
Good plan. Yep. Thank you, Amanda.
Yep.
The county auditor's role, the county auditor, of course, after the budget is completed, will certify the county budget and all other local government budgets. And the certification is really to help ensure that the statutorily required steps were taken to give public notice, etc. Published documents are published, rates weren't used that were unallowable. For instance, if they had an election to use a rate that was actually what happened. They're not just using a rate that requires an election and they didn't have the election, that sort of thing. So as county auditors know, you play an important role in the certification of local budgets. And just sort of as an aside, because I know I have a lot of county auditors and staff on this presentation, we will be doing a separate webinar on the certification process, because it will be, of course, a little bit different for cities, counties, and schools with the implementation of House File 718. So we are planning to do a separate, real focused training on that after the first of the year when budgets start happening, I guess I would say. So look for more information and more detail specifically about certification from us. We're definitely planning on that. We know that, things are changing and we want to help folks out and figure all those questions out as we deal with them. And then Department of Management's role on sort of the back end of the budget process is to certify those final property tax levies. So we go in and we finalize budgets, those that levy tax, in the online system, and our system generates a 1-page summary basically of the tax rates and amounts for that individual levy authority. And so that's our certification process. And we also do provide the consolidated rates by tax district for review by county auditors, just to sort of double check that we're all on the same page with what those tax rates need to be in what districts.
Hey,
So that's sort of, yeah, go ahead.
all right, just to clarify, the slide before this, that is an old screenshot just meant to
Oh, yeah.
show you what that checklist looks like. That March 15th deadline listed on there is actually going to read April 30th.
Right. And this is, yeah, exactly. You guys know that you have a checklist in the online system. You have individualized checklists for each of the levy authorities that are a pop-up box now. So this is, yeah, just sort of a, like a, hey, county auditor certification in general looks like this. It's not what you're actually going to be seeing on the screen. And at this point now, so that's sort of all of our basic overview of what do we all have to do and what's the general time frame. What I wanted to do now is really sort of walk through the different steps, right? So and the different sort of pieces and the changes and all that good stuff. So let's talk about, for the county, our basic property tax levies. So when we talk about the basic property tax levies, we're really talking about general basic and rural basic. For the current year, so the year that we're in, it's operated the same as it has for a number of years, right? Your general basic is $3.50 per $1,000 of taxable value. For general county services, which are those that benefit everybody in the county, and $3.95 for rural county services intended to benefit those outside city limits. So, for a number of years, what has been allowed is, these are your basic levies. You as a county can determine if it's for a set number of reasons laid out in the code that you need to exceed those basic limits. And you have done so in the past by basically completing an additional page in your budget forms that's also published with your regular budget notice. And, it's a communication tool to tell your public, hey, for this reason, in our general basic, we're not going to do $3.50, we're going to do $4, and this is the reason. So that's been the process for any number of years. And that's the process that you undertook for fiscal 24, the year that we're currently in. So when we move to fiscal 25, the definitions of these levies and sort of how they're used remain the same, but we're going to use a different method to calculate levy limits. And those are calculated really for each and every county for the general basic, on its own, and for the rural basic on its own. So each of the basic levies will be calculated on their own and for each and every county. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit more in detail about how this happens. Again, House File 718 strikes your ability just to publish that extra notice and exceed the $3.50 and $3.95. Doesn't make any changes to prior years or the current year. It allows, if you're currently exceeding in fiscal 24, it allows whatever that amount is to be included in the base calculation for your maximum rates for fiscal 25. So if you were at $4 in fiscal 24, when we calculate your maximum rate and dollars for fiscal 25, we're going to use that $4 amount as part of the calculation. So it's included in your base. We're not pushing you back to $3.50 if you are already in current year at $4. Moving forward though, say you've never exceeded before that $3.50, if you are wanting to do so in the future, or at least for the next few years, you would have to hold an election to exceed that basic levy, and it's got certain parameters on it in statute now based on length and, you know, allowable uses. So if that's something that comes up, you know, in the next fiscal year or something as a discussion item for your county, you'll want to do some research on that process. And then, okay, so we know that the 350 and the 395, they still have a role to play, but it's really, it's different now. What's happening now is the general goal, as we understand it, is to bring all of the levies back under or to the max, those old max rates of 350 and 395. The rate each year becomes part of the calculation for the next year. And I know that was one of the questions yesterday and one of the clarifications I wanted to make sure that's made. We're not going back to you know, the rate 3 years ago to calculate the budget year rate. We're comparing year to year each year. In fiscal 29, according to the bill, the maximums will go back to 350 and 395. So say you're at, you know, $6 in your general basic, even with a potential sort of ratcheting down mechanism that they have in place, by fiscal 29, you're probably not going to be all the way down to 350, right? So the way the bill's written, though, it would drop you to 350 or 395 automatically in fiscal 29. That's the way the language is currently written. So be sure to keep that in mind. So when we talk about, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Carrie, I know we've talked about this before, but yeah, just be mindful of where you're at. I mean, we're doing calculations in my county now, and I know some other counties, Clinton County and we've talked about this, that we're preparing now. So because the way our valuations are, it's not going to stair step us down to 350 by fiscal year 29. So we're preparing over the next several years to be ready to be at 350. So we're not having to make such a drastic cut in that last year. Because no matter where we're at in 28, if we're still at $4, they're going to drop us 50 cents in 29, whether our valuations push us there or not.
Right. At that point for 29, this sort of growth limitation goes away. It's just simply 350 or 395. So and what this growth limitation does is it essentially reduces your levy and your levy rate by constraining the growth each year, depending on sort of what happened with your values as we compare budget year to current year. So when we compare, and this is what the mechanism is going to do, we're going to take a look at your fiscal 24 value. So your current year non-TIF taxable value for 24. We're going to look at that. And then once your valuations are filed for fiscal 25, we're going to see what that same number is for 25. And we're going to compare that growth. If that growth is under 3%, then basically whatever your levy rate was, you're going to just get to keep that levy rate and garner whatever amount of growth there was. There is no mechanism that's going to reduce you further. You just get what you get, essentially, if your growth is less than 3%. If you're in the middle window, so if we compare fiscal 24 to fiscal 25 value and your growth is over 3 but less than 6, essentially you're going to shave off 2% of that growth amount. So it's, you know, a constraint or a limit in the potential growth. So if you grew between those 2 years, if you grew 5%, 2% of that potential revenue growth is going to get shaved off. So you're only going to be, we're going to back you into a rate that would only allow around a 3% growth. And then if your growth, when we compare it, is over 6%, then we're going to shave off 3% off the top. So say your growth was 10%. When we compared those two valuation years, we're going to shave 3% off of that potential growth, and you'd only be allowed to grow 7% in your revenue. Thereabouts. There's a rounding thing, but so I'll show you a little example here if that would be helpful. Got to move things around so I can see my screen a little better. Okay, so this is an example, and what I used were actual numbers from 23 and 24, just to have, real life numbers to compare to. So in this case, in this example, we had a county in, we're going to say in 24, their rate was $4.50 for their general basic rate. They levied, that generated for them for tax revenue, 1.86 million in dollars. Their non-TIF taxable value, and it does include gas and electric. So this value here is the with gas and electric amount, because we're looking at what the value that's used to apply the rate to, right? So that's why we look at the value with gas and electric. It was at 415 million. When we take a look at the next year's value coming in, that value amount went up to 418 million, which is about a 1% growth. And obviously they're under 3%, right, in growth. So they have a limitation percentage of 0. They don't have a limitation amount applied to them, or percentage applied to their amount. So essentially they can use their $4.50 rate and get what they get from that revenue growth, from that taxable valuation growth. They'll get, just about 1% in revenue growth, because they're not limited, because their taxable growth was under 3%. So if we look at their rural basic, they were levying $2.73. That generated about 933,000, sorry. Non-TIF taxable was 341. When we compare it to, the budget year, it goes up to 349, which is about a 2% growth in value. But again, it's under 3%, so they don't have a limitation percentage applied to them. So that provides them with the same rate, generating $955,000 and, about a 2% revenue growth. Now, the important thing to mention here, though, in this case, because they were already less than the maximum per their own choice, they could go up to $3.95 if politically that was an option they thought they could sustain. So just sort of keep that in mind, because they were under the limit. They could technically go up to the $3.95 should they choose to. And then let's look at a different sort of example. So in this case, we have a county that was at their general basic maximum of $3.50. That generated 3.6 million in dollars. Their non-TIF taxable was 1.032 in the current year. And then when we see what they brought in for the budget year, we see it increased to 1.098, which is over 6%. So that puts them in the top tier of the limitation. So therefore, their revenue limitation percentage would be 3%. So that would be applied to their rate in dollars. So we would back into a lower rate. Still growth, but not as much growth had they applied the 350 to the full value, right? So we're forcing them to use a lower rate and forcing their revenue growth down to 3.2% instead of that 6.38%. And then if we look at their situation in their rural basic, $2.60, their dollars were 1.9. Their value was 736, which then grew to 781, which again is about a 6% growth, putting them in the top tier limitation of 3%. So this again would force their rate down a little bit. so that their revenue growth or dollar growth would be just right about 3%. So that's a couple examples of what this would look like in practicality. Now I've sent several folks, and we're going to include it in the budget instructions. And I know Amanda has a version of it too. I have a spreadsheet that is basically what you all just looked at that you can plug numbers into. Obviously, valuations aren't filed yet, right? So we're still speculating, but a lot of folks either know their values at this point, or they're pretty close to knowing what their values are going to be, and they kind of want to play with those numbers before values may be officially filed in January. So with the budget instructions, I am providing that Excel spreadsheet that you can, just sort of play with on your own. And then once your values are filed in the online system, the value numbers are going to pull right into the budget forms, and our budget form on the top is going to look exactly like this, right? So we have all of the current year information from our system. That's all going to populate. And then once the county files value, it's going to pull in that fiscal 25, that assessment year 2023 valuation number, and it'll calculate the limitations. So you'll see that at the top of the property tax page once you go into your budget forms. Again, it's not going to tell you anything until valuation is filed, but once it's filed, it's pretty instantaneous that it'll do that calculation for you and show you your maximum.
Carrie, can we hit on a few questions here real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so in fiscal year 28, if the levy is going to be 320, for example, they're wondering if in fiscal 29 they can go up to 350.
Yes. It's
Okay.
just straight up. There's
Yep.
no more comparison, no more calculation. It's just 350, 395.
Yeah, back to normal.
Yep.
Okay. And then okay, so a little more clarification on the 3% versus 2%. So Carrie had a really good picture at one of our trainings. So if your growth is under 3%, you don't have to worry about anything. There's no reduction. If it's between 3 and 6%, that's where you're going to get that 2% reduction, Doreen. So that's where the 2% reduction is coming in. If you're between 3 and 6%, and then if you're over 6%, that's where you get a 3% reduction. So that's a little confusing. It's just knowing where you fall as far as your growth. But again, like you said, once we all start filing our valuations, like if you file your valuations next week, the system then on the budget side will be ready to populate this spreadsheet for you, that information. So you're not going to have to calculate it necessarily, but it's still important for you to understand the process. But all of that information will be on the Department of Management website for you.
Yeah, exactly. This calculation is going to be just part of the sheet, and hopefully that'll help kind of make it clear as you're trying to explain it, to other folks in the county, or having that discussion with your board of supervisors. Like, this is all the math is going to be here. Like, you'll see just exactly what this thing is, how we get to, that maximum. It'll show all these pieces, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you don't have to do it, but just like Amanda said, it is important to understand it.
Yeah. Okay, so then what happens if the value, or if your growth is right at 3% or right at 6%?
I mean, it's never going to be right at, right? I mean, if you have to, you're going to have to, if somebody is falling, I mean, it's either one or the other. You might have to go out a little ways to figure it out, right? You might have to go out a few decimal places to figure it out, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be one or the other.
And the system will catch that for you. It'll tell you which rate you should be at.
Yes, because it's going to calculate the growth, and then based on that calculation of growth, it'll then say, what tier of the 3 tiers is one way to look at it. I don't know if that's the right word, but what category you fall in as far as the limitation. But
Okay,
yeah, I mean, you're right. Like if you're real close to one of those limits, that kind of, you know, it could be unfortunate if you fall on one side or the other of one of the limits, but they got to draw the line somewhere, I suppose. So,
but if you land right on the money at 3% or 6%, will you let us know that? It's interesting.
yeah.
On this screen, your general basic at 418, 371, 932. Yes, that is information that is pulling in automatically.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That will pull in.
Mhm.
When you see it as part of your budget forms, as soon as you file value now, you don't have to wait. As soon as you file value, it pulls it right into the spreadsheet. So it'll pull it right in, you'll see the value, the budget year value, and it will calculate the rest of the sheet for you.
Okay, one more real quick and then we'll move on. Can you please clarify the non-TIF taxable with gas and electric from prior year? Is this the budget adoption value, or if there have been court orders after the valuation, do we have a different tax base? Then to add to that, if the court orders occurred after last year's adoption, which tax base is being considered?
You're going to use the value that was used to determine your tax rate. Right? So we know that when you adopt your budget and determine your tax rate, you're using a value. And something might happen after that time, right? But your tax rate doesn't change. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So if you're levying 350 and in your budget, you're using the value, your 350 is going to generate you, $2 million, whatever. We know at the end of the day, maybe there was a PAB case that came in and wiped, $50,000 off of that or $500,000 off of that. But that did not change your tax rate from 350. Your tax rate is still 350. So it is the amount of value that's used to determine your tax rate in the budget. So that's why we're going back and pulling, from the budget itself.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always the value that's used to determine the tax rate. That's why it's non-TIF, because this is for the basic rates, we always use just the value without TIF, without increment value, right? And then with gas and electric, because the gas and electric value is included to determine the tax rate, even though we know at the end of the day, gas and electric, the revenue from them comes in as utility replacement tax, not property tax. So, just sort of one of those variations of the system, but it kind of is what it is. But yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't had to explain that yet. So that's a good question. Okay, so we talked about the basic limits. So let's talk about the supplemental levies, and these didn't change. Now, there was discussion at different points about trying to do different things with parts of the supplemental levy, et cetera. There were different proposals out there, but at the end of the day, nothing changed with your supplemental levies. Again, they're limited in purpose, but not amount. 331-424 talks about how you can use your general supplemental, and 424-2 talks about how you can use your rural supplemental. The general and rural basic levies must be at the county's rate limit before using the applicable supplemental levy. So in our example earlier where we had the county with, their general basic rate limit is now $3.39. Well, that's their rate limit. So it's not 350, but it is their rate limit. So they could still use the general supplemental as long as they chose to use that full $3, what did I say, 39 cents. So the supplemental levies really haven't changed. It's just, you're going to have to be looking at, well, what's your, as a county, what's my rate limit? I have to be maxing that out in order to use a supplemental levy. If you decided to do $3 instead of $3.39, then you couldn't use a supplemental levy. Okay, so before we move on to a couple other changes, is there any other questions sort of about that piece of it? Did anything come in?
Just 1 second, one just came in. Okay, is it correct that we care about the taxable growth percentage, not the revenue growth percentage? If so, what is the purpose of the revenue growth percentage?
Well, the taxable value growth will determine kind of where you stand. The revenue growth percentage is what the limitation is. The taxable value growth is what puts you in a category of having a revenue limitation or not. So that's like the first step. Well, what'd your value do? Did it grow? How much did it grow? If it grew under 3%, then you don't have a revenue limitation. You're just sort of going to be able to get what you can get from the value growth you had. If you're in that middle window of 3 to 6, then your revenue growth potential essentially gets 2% shaved off of it. And then if you're over 6% growth in taxable value, then your revenue growth gets 3% shaved off of it. So really the taxable value growth is part of the calculation. The revenue growth is what's actually putting the limiter on you. Does that make sense?
So they're both important. They kind of
Yeah.
feed off of each other. So it's both important information. It's just really one is showing where you land and how much revenue you get.
Right, exactly. The growth in taxable value determines where you would go as far as a limiter. If you don't have a lot of growth, then you're not going to be, limited. If you have a lot of growth, then you're going to have, more of a constraint put on your growth potential.
And one more quick, Carrie. Okay,
Yeah.
so this came up yesterday too. So if someone starts out, if they currently don't have a supplemental levy, their real basic is at 260.
Mm-hmm.
And the rate limit pushes them down to 252. They would be able to do supplemental based on the new 252 if they stayed at that rate, because that becomes their new ceiling.
Right. Yep.
So whether they were at or under the 395 rural basic cap is irrelevant moving forward.
Really, it is. Exactly. Those rates are sort of, they don't come into play so much anymore unless you're somebody that had very little growth and were under the 350 or 395. Now, for most folks, if you have had very little growth and you have very little growth, you probably weren't under the 350, but maybe you were under the rural basic. Maybe you weren't capturing everything in the rural basic yet, because the rural basic is more of a limited rate, right? I mean, there's not as much you can do with it.
Right.
So there's plenty of folks that weren't necessarily levying the 395. And if they, like in the first example, if they didn't have much revenue growth and so then aren't limited, we're not going to push down their rate at all. We're going to, leave them the same. But if they're under, they still could go up to the 395. So it's kind of like we're calculating a new rate. It's not kind of like we are calculating a new rate limit for each and every county. That's an individual rate limit, frankly. And it's an individual rate limit for both their general basic and their rural basic.
Right. So Michelle, if you're let's say that rate limit reduces you to 252 In the Department of Management system, it's gonna say your new maximum or levy limit is $2.52. That is your new maximum. If your county decides to budget and levy at 252, you then will be able to use rural supplemental. But if your county says, we don't need 252, we only need 240, well, you're not reaching that Department of Management projected 252 maximum, new maximum for your county. You cannot use supplemental.
Yeah, you have to be maxing out what you can do with the basic rate, whatever that means for your county.
Yeah, and the spreadsheet will reflect this. It will show that new max number, what it should be. It'll either reduce it if that's what's going to happen based on your growth. So you won't have to worry about trying to calculate that.
Right, exactly. So we'll say, you know, just like in this example here, we'll say, okay, your max rate is $3.39. And, you know, in the regular part of the budget, if you try to put $3.50, you'll get an error because we know it can't be greater than this field, right? So yeah, it's all sorts of fun math behind the scenes, but we at least will do some of that work for you. And certainly, guys, as you're working on stuff, just let me know if you have questions and you know what maybe needs clarification or doesn't make sense to you once you're looking at the forms themselves. A quick note on business property tax replacement. As you budget for fiscal 25, just keep in mind that the business property tax used to be a credit, but now it's a reduction in value. You are getting a replacement for some of that loss. And as a replacement, it's sort of like commercial and industrial, which is on the other side going away, but it's a similar type of revenue. It's a 2,200 revenue source now instead of being a 2,100. This past fall was the first year you got that replacement revenue for what used to be business property tax credit and now is tier one, whatever. So this fall was the first year that you got that type of revenue. So as you look towards budgeting for fiscal 25, you can take a look at what you received for that first half payment. That might help you estimate the fiscal 25 replacement amount for that thing that we all received. Commercial and industrial, though, of course, continues to phase out. And we have a spreadsheet out there that can help you estimate, you know, where you're at as an individual county in that phase out amount. So everyone's still getting a little bit, but it phases out over either 5 or 8 years, I believe. So we haven't quite reached the end there. A couple other changes that were House File 718 changes, the homestead exemption. So we still have the existing homestead credit that we've always had, and that is funded by the state, but they also did add a homestead exemption for individuals over 65, and this comes into play for the fiscal 25. So those folks get a property value exemption of $3,250, and then it goes up for the next fiscal year to $6,500. And those that revenue reduction is not replaced by the state. So you're just going to see essentially less value to tax against, right? Because it's an exemption. And similarly, military exemption was increased. It has been $1,852 for a really long time, but they increased it to $4,000. So it's again that reduction of value, and that takes place in fiscal 25 moving forward. And the change there, though, it's not going to be funded moving forward, starting with fiscal 25. So again, sort of a reduction in value that you're able to tax against, but there's not a replacement for those dollars. If you're looking for information as far as, you know, looking to see what counties have what rates and, you know, where other counties are for their rates, or you're interested in historical information, you can always go to that county resource page. And I do have lots of years on county property tax rates. So rates and levy dollars. So if you're wanting to, do a little research or somebody asks you a question about property tax revenue or rates, you can always go and pull those up. This is, there's 2 tabs within there, one that's rates and one that's more dollars, like levy dollars. So, certainly you can go pull that information if you're interested. So I want to walk through the budget timeline process, and there is an example county budget process calendar that is being provided as part of the budget instructions that I'll send out. And I know folks have seen this already too, and this is an example of a way to approach your calendar. Obviously, keep in mind that you're going to have to look at your individual publication dates and meeting dates, and well, when do you have to get your newspaper, their information in order to publish, et cetera, et cetera. But it does give you kind of an idea. As part of House File 718, there is this new property tax levy hearing. Okay, so this replaces the old max levy that you used to have to do, if you're familiar. So you have this additional hearing that takes place prior to the notice and hearing on the full budget. And this is going to be a requirement of cities, counties, and schools. So they have to set a date for hearing on their tax asking, so that what they're communicating to the public is really sort of like the max levy, in that they're talking about, well, this is what we're asking for in taxes. And so the notice of the hearing needs to be published, right? And that's not less than 10, no more than 20 days, similar to always. And there's also this additional requirement for a mailing to be sent by the county auditor by March 20th. And as far as that mailing piece, I think it's prudent to mention that, we're going to talk more specifically to the county auditors and their staff about that process, in greater detail after the budget process has started, right? Because it's a duty of the county auditor's office, but not a duty for folks that are budget officials. So I kind of want to keep us on the budget official side of things. But yes, we're aware that this is something new and fun that the county auditors are going to have to be doing, and we will address it more specifically and separately and in more detail with, those that are going to be responsible for this mailing. But counties, as a levying body, also have to, they're part of the information provided in the mailing. And some of the information is going to come from the Department of Management, just database, because they're asking you or ask via the mailing, they're asking for information be provided on the current year. So we have all of that, right? Propose your information. You will have to provide that. And via providing it in your budget forms for the notice you have to provide, that's where we're going to pull it for county auditors to include in the hearing mailing. An explanation of increase, examples of tax impact. We're going to do that. Percentage of current year tax rate in relation to other levy authorities. We'll do that. Again, that's current year information. Date, time, and place of the hearing. One important note, this cannot occur during another meeting. This proposed tax levy hearing has to sort of stand on its own as its own meeting. That doesn't mean you can't do another meeting that same night, but they would really have to be separately scheduled and separately, have separate agendas. You can't have this hearing in the middle of a regularly scheduled meeting, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And of course, it's the notice is published as you would regularly publish a notice, but then this also needs to be put on your local government webpage and, social media if you have it. So you do that process, you have that hearing. The next step would be that your county, your board of supervisors at at a regular meeting would set the date for the regular budget hearing. And then that is noticed as always, not less than 10, no more than 20 days. Again, your regular budget hearing notice has to include some language about protests, which that's sort of a requirement that's been in place for a few years, and we have that language in there. Notice of public hearing, of course, is published in all your newspapers, not less than 10, no more than 20. And of course, after that hearing is held, when you adopt, you can reduce expenditures, but not increase them. Same with your levies. The hearing itself, and this is just sort of a side note, it's good to think about this as a way to communicate your budget to the public. Some suggest graphs and charts, changes, projects you're doing, just think through what might be the best way to communicate your budget to the public via that hearing. After the hearing, of course, the board would adopt the budget by resolution, and the deadline is April 30 now as we go into fiscal 23. If you're going to certify late without an extension, you are limited to the prior year's budget amount for taxes. That would be your tax dollars. You would be limited to the prior year, so really the current year tax dollars. And you can request an extension still, but only for circumstances beyond the control of the county. That's the same language that's been in there. And really what we're talking about there, the most common reason is that your newspaper messes something up and doesn't get your notice published or what have you. That's the most common reason why we're giving extensions now, it seems. The budget protest deadline is May 10th now to accommodate that later budget deadline. And when again, the notice, we thought maybe with the notice information, including some information on protests, that we might see more protests. I would say that's not necessarily been the case, but certainly we do get inquiries. If you as a county, want to know more about the process, say you hear rumblings and you're like, okay, what does a budget protest entail? Please let me know, and I can help you, understand what that looks like. Protests to county budgets do require at least 100 signatures. And even if it's not a protest for your budget, all of those protests come through the county auditor's office. So your a local city or school district could be protested. Those documents are still going to come through the county auditor's office. So if you are seeing those documents and you have questions, certainly call, one of us at Department of Management, and we'll help you get those where they need to go. For the fiscal year, the board, of course, appropriates by resolution, and there is, Code of Iowa language that talks about how it is unlawful for someone to expend without appropriation. So that's just, just sort of one of those checks and balances to make sure, to keep that sort of, safety net on public expenditures. Increases and decreases in appropriations do not necessarily require budget amendments. Keep in mind, budget amendments are required and come into play when we're going to expend more than budgeted in one of our expenditure classes. So there may be situations where you're sort of moving money around or capability to spend around within a service area, but you're not changing the overall service area, so it's not rising to the level of a budget amendment. If you are, though, going to decrease in an appropriation for an office or department of more than 10% or 5,000, you do need to hold a public hearing on the matter. And I sort of already talked about budget amendments. They do require same notice and hearing process as the original budget, but we're not talking about any of that extra stuff at the beginning, House File 718 hearing, not that, just the regular, just one regular hearing is what's required for an amendment. And you do amend in the online system. So I know most folks, if you're not new, have probably amended in the online system. Essentially, you go pull up that current year budget and you click amend on it, and it generates that one-page form that is your amendment. So at this point, I'll take a few moments to kind of walk through some of the screens in the budget system.
Hey, Carrie,
Yeah.
can I just back up real quick and clarify what is included on that hearing notice? It is the proposed tax rate in total.
Okay, so I can show you what that hearing notice looks like. So we're talking about the additional one, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So in this case, I mean, this is sort of was an easy example, but yeah, we are talking about so this hearing notice is going to be fully populated either from the system from current year information or from what you input on the property tax, request page, right? So it is the total rate that we're talking about. Total rate countywide, total rate rule
Just
is what
based
we're
on
looking at.
values.
Not on the property tax hearing notice. That's what this is showing, just because for ease of purpose, this was an
Yeah.
example I put together, but it is the total rate countywide and total tax dollars. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay. That's then this new notice is called the property tax notice. So just sort of FYI, we got a budget adoption notice, proposed tax notice is what this is called. And we still have the exceed general and exceed rule in here, but keep in mind you're only going to be using those moving forward if you are holding an election to exceed those and you haven't exceeded them in the past. So I would imagine these won't be used anymore. I got to kind of keep them in there because there's a potential, someone could use it in the future, but I don't anticipate them being used anymore for most folks. So your first requirement, of course, is going to be to do that proposed tax notice. You're going to be doing that by filling in that property tax tab, right? So the property tax tab is where, did I include it in here? I did not. The property tax tab is going to look just like it always has, where you put in your tax asking, but at the top, it's going to have that calculation that I showed you to arrive at your max. So it'll have that. You'll input, what you're actually proposing you're going to ask for, and then that'll pull over onto the proposed tax notice. And then, of course, you'll propose it just like you would a regular notice. One thing to keep in mind too, and this is for, everybody. You gotta get this information in there by March 15th. We suggest March 5th, and the reason being, this is the information that the county auditor is going to use for the mailing. So you're not going to be entering anything else additional, because what's used in the mailing is going to come from your proposed tax notice. So by you as a county or, the city and the school completing their proposed tax notice, that gives Department of Management, and then at the end of the day, the county auditors, the information they need to complete that mailing to your citizens. So there's not somewhere else that you're going to be entering that information. You're going to enter it in the notice. You got to use it for the notice anyway. And then, as a side note, Department of Management, we're collecting all that, putting it all into a little data file and sending that or making it available to county auditors as they do the mailing. So there's not an additional step for budget submitters for the proposed tax notice and the hearing. It's all just sort of by doing the hearing notice, the information that's needed for the mailing is being provided. You know, that's sort of rigmarole to explain, but I just want to make sure people understand that you're not completing anything different for the actual mailing. You're just filling out your notice, and that gives us what we need for the mailing too. Just and similar to the max levy, you know, you can work in any of those budget pages as you choose, but you do need to complete that proposed tax notice first. Sorry, my dog is barking because someone knocked at the door. So you can't propose or publish the regular budget notice until the proposed tax notice has been proposed. This is just like the max levy situation, right? You've got to do one before, and that has to be completed before you do the other. Similarly as before for that, for your valuations, once they're filed, they'll show up as filed, you know, on the main page of the online system. You'll either be in filed or unfiled status. But if you're in the system, if you're just in the budget system, if the valuations are in an unfiled status, then you'll see this little yellow notification. Budget actions, these remain the same. You can check errors, save and print. You can print, this was new maybe last year, that you could print just the current tab or print the full document. So that's similar to last year. So if you just want to print off and show individuals the existing page that you're on, that's an option just by printing the current tab. Before, you know, save as a PDF, so that way you have that available to you. You check your errors like before. You can only publish and propose once there are no errors. Publish, propose, that's going to be, you know, the same thing where you enter your hearing date and time and location, and you can enter some of your, if you are still doing some electronic components to your meeting, you can enter that within the location. Yeah, so again, similarly, the publication notice is its own page in the budget. After the public hearing, the board can make any allowable revisions. They can decrease to the budget by returning to draft, which basically just makes your budget open for edits. And the budget is then again proposed and published in order to bring it back to the status that's ready to be adopted. Let's see. And just as a reminder, when you do adopt the budget, you do need to adopt it by resolution. So you'd enter your adoption date and your resolution number. With the county auditor, you're going to need to file the proof of publication for the proposed tax notice and the proof of publication for the regular budget notice. So you're sending in 2 proofs of publication. And then the signed adopted budget and supplementary pages. We do also recommend filing the budget resolution as well, because you're required to adopt it by resolution. So that's sort of the process in general. Sorry, I sped through the last part because I want to make sure that we aren't keeping people too far past the time frame, but we'll just sort of open it up to any additional questions.
There's one thing that I do want to clarify that was asked in the chat. This mailing is at the expense of the county. So we cannot individually invoice our schools and cities for doing this mailing. It is truly our cost. And it was asked yesterday, whose budget? That is up to the county. So it's either you know, the auditor's budget, supervisor's budget, that's completely up to each individual county, how you prepare that. But think of it as your tax statement, so that the notice is going to whomever is paying the taxes for that parcel. Okay.
And I do think that's important to mention too. And I know it is, you know, sort of an unanticipated expense that people are going to have to sort of, you know, start thinking about as they budget moving forward.
Okay, another one. This is the first year our county will be receiving revenue from windmills. Am I correct that the growth limitation includes all rural property except TIF, which would include the windmills?
So the part of the value that's in the base, so the non-increment part of the value is included in the calculation. So, whatever that base amount is, if it's not being TIFed, essentially, then yes, it would be included in the rule value for purposes of calculating the growth.
Is there anything in the code that prevents a county from including another document in the mailing? For example, if a county wants to do a survey to their residents, can they include that in the mailing?
I would not advise that, frankly. I don't think that's the intent. Um, yeah, I think the description of the mailing itself is really specific, very, very specific in statute. So if you wanted to do some other, mailing to taxpayers, I would suggest it be separate from this particular document.
I know there's several counties that have started looking into the cost of the mailing. It is spendy. I know Adams County looked at it last week and it was north of $5,000 just for her smallest county in the state. So be looking at that, because if you're like most counties, you're budgeting to the penny. So budget amendment will probably be in your future.
Yeah, good point to bring up as well. It is something to consider. And just as a side note to this process, the software folks as well as the mail service vendors are involved in the discussion. We've had them be part of meetings. They all sort of know this something additional is coming, and they're planning for it, and we're trying to make sure that we can get them what they need to, ease the process and, make it as smooth as possible. There is, we have a template of what that, document is going to look like. And then also the data that goes into the document that we're going to be providing, making available to counties in order to do the mailing. So there is a lot of work sort of behind the scenes, getting prepared for this, additional new step that folks are going to be doing.
And we know this is going to be bumpy the first year. We do. We know that. I think the hardest part for people to understand right now is the mailing and who gets it. So think of it as who's paying the taxes for that parcel. If it's somebody who lives, they have multiple parcels, but it's within the same taxing district, so it's the same information. We're not going to send them 5 sheets of the same paper. So, but if they have 5 parcels across 5 different taxing districts, then the code requires that they get 5 notices because it's 5 different levies.
Right. And I think Amanda made a good point too about, this is the first year for this. This is a new process that county auditors haven't been involved in this type of mailing before. And taxpayers haven't really received this sort of thing before. So there's going to be questions. It's going to be a little bumpy. One of the things that I would mention that we did mention yesterday, like we know that there's going to be situations where people don't get the mailing, right? I mean, you may send it, your mail vendors send the mailing, but somebody doesn't get it. It gets, lost in the mail or dropped by the mail carrier or, in a snowbank or who knows. One of the things that the statutory language does provide is that failure of a person to receive the mailing does not invalidate the mailing itself. So that's sort of a safety net, I guess. You can't have someone say, I didn't get this mailing, I didn't know about this hearing, this invalidates the whole process. That's not going to happen. We know there's a lot of moving parts here. There's people, and it's something's going to happen. Somebody doesn't get it like we intend, and that doesn't invalidate the process.
So we're hoping, so we've been working with the vendors that provide service, to everybody. So someone's asking who's going to determine when letters can be combined. Unfortunately, that is going to fall to us. We're gonna, to save money, can we hit print and just stuff envelopes and the same person get the 5 of the same letter? Yeah, but that's not very cost effective. But then I know it's going to take time to weed through the list and determine, how many people. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet. We're really hoping that the vendors can help us sort through this and condense the list based on taxpayer within, the same taxing district. That is my hope.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense. But we know, again, it's a new process and there's going to be some bumps along the way. Everyone's going to, do their best to get this out in a timely fashion and learn from the first year.
There's a question, it just says, and farm management companies. Do you know what she's referencing?
I don't.
Lucy, do you mind expanding on that? Then, okay, how do you coordinate the letter with the cities and schools since we have different hearing dates? There's actually different sections on the notice. There's going to be one for counties, one for cities, one's for schools. So all of that information is actually being pulled from Department of Management. Once the school uploads their information and the cities upload their information, then it will be populated accordingly on the notice within their section.
Yep. So once they complete their notice page, everybody, the county, the cities, the school, that all goes into our database. And then we're going to spit out a file for the county auditors to use, their software to use, that matches up by tax district. This tax district has this school, this city, the county, right? Rural or urban. Well, in this case, it'd be urban. So it'll say for each tax district, this is this school, this is this school's hearing date, hearing time, hearing notice. So it's going to be like a big long string of information for each and every tax district in the county, right? And so then this might be getting way more into the weeds than people want, but that then maps to a template of what the notice looks like. So depending on what tax district you're in as a taxpayer, it'll populate the information applicable to you as far as this is your school's hearing time, date, place, blah, blah, blah. It's all just separated out, and it'll be one sheet front and back with the address on it, so you can use window envelopes.
Yeah, and so the notice itself, while it will have the person's address on it, the information is not specific to that person. So if someone who lives in the same township as me, they're going to get the same exact notice. My neighbor will have the same notice as me because they're in all the same taxing districts as me. So, so there is no specific parcel information on the notice.
Right.
Okay. And Lucy said, okay, clarified. Oh, the farm management. Okay, so Hertz Farm Management manages thousands of properties and is the entity that receives the tax statements. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, so if the properties all reside, which if there's thousands, I'm not sure, but if they all reside within the same taxing districts, school, city, county, whatever, they only need one statement. Yeah. But if they cross various tax districts, I just feel like I'm reliving the city school election right now. I'm trying to figure out where, who gets what ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Okay, Rebecca Bissell. Is there an approved format for the letter for the vendors to use? Yes. Yeah, so we've been coordinating with all of the vendors. So if they don't have it right now, they will have this information. Do they have the template, Carrie?
I think there was only one slight change we were making to the template.
Okay.
And it was more about listing, what was it? Like listing the county being able to list their own tax district number. Remember that discussion,
Yep. Yep.
Amanda?
Yep.
So that was the only sort of tweak we were making to the
Yeah.
template. So yeah.
So
And I could maybe I was gonna say maybe I could just kind of pop it up. I don't know. I don't want to keep people on if they need to go. But I was gonna say I could
um,
probably pop up the template if people want to take a look.
and the other thing that on the tax statement, if a city, or I doubt a school, if a city does not submit any information, they will be zeros on this notice. And there will be a blurb on the back that says, yes, they are zeros. You can reach out to that entity for further information, something along those lines. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And then oh, okay. So I'm gonna see if I can share this real quick, just so we all kind of know what we're talking about here. So let me share my screen. Okay. All right. So are you seeing this, Amanda?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can kind of see this is where your address would populate. Taxing district, we're providing the information by state taxing district, but county your own number and name would be there. And you could have your return information there or not. Here's your name and address for the person. So in this example, it's a Polk County situation. So we have Ankeny's. Here's the school public hearing information. This is their current, this is their proposed, Polk County. This would be populated with their hearing information, current and proposed. This is someone that lives in the city of Ankeny. So there's the city of Ankeny's information. This is one of the things the law requires is how taxes are distributed, like who has the percentage of what. And so that would be listed here as well. And this is all, nobody's typing anything in here. I just want to be clear. Like this is all going to be populated via a data file from Department of Management. We'll have all the information, and the data will populate this template, according to the tax district. So this is a calculation we're doing as far as how taxes within the district are distributed, like schools 45%, and like we have that information, so we can show that, and then taxes on a property with a value of 100,000, how that would be shown. So just sort of FYI, this is what this piece of information will look like that would go to your citizens.
Carrie, will you explain the effective tax rate?
Yeah, so the effective tax rate is just saying, and this kind of goes back to the max levy. You guys might remember that term thrown around in regards to the max levy. It's just basically saying, okay, well, if you were asking for the same tax dollars in the budget year that you asked for in the current year, what would that do to your tax rate? Well, for most people, their value is going up. So if you're asking for the same amount of money, then that would push your tax rate down. So that's the purpose of demonstrating the effective tax rate. And it does include an explanation up here, because I think it is probably not a term that a lot of people would know. So we are including an explanation. Yeah, that's what it'll look like. And I mean, there's certainly like things that have to be figured out. And I just want to give kudos to this working group of folks like Amanda that have really given a ton of thought to how do we do this? What are the best methods? Discussions with software vendors. It really couldn't have been figured out without the great assistance of your local folks. So we appreciate it.
No, this does not include township budgets. This
Nope.
is literally just city, schools, and county.
Yep. So if it's a rural taxpayer, obviously like the city information will be, there won't be a city hearing to list. They'll just have the county and the school. Anything else, friends?
Let's see. We are working with the software companies. We would love for it to only produce one letter per district. Um, we are told that printing companies will not be able to do that because they don't have that information. So you are correct there, but we are hoping that our software companies will be able to help us. I know that it would be tedious to export into Excel, find the duplicates. I know that is not ideal. So we are really hoping that the software companies can help us.
And maybe, you know, moving forward, there'll be ways that everyone can kind of figure out to streamline the process.
Mhm. Okay. Oh, if we have a geo debt, do they still have to use the April 15th deadline, or was that extended to?
That was not extended. There was no change made to that language.
Okay. Okay. I think. Okay, some of these I will sidebar and answer separately.
Okay, that sounds good.
Um, yes, everything that you have seen today is available to be viewed later, including this Q&A screen. You will get to see all of our conversations. So that will be uploaded later too. Okay.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, feel free, you know, at any point to follow up with me with any questions you have regarding the budget process or anything we talked about today. I'm happy to assist however I can. Just kind of let me know. And the budget forms themselves, they're the OCIO, our IT people are just making a few tweaks to the notice page. And so that should be released shortly. And when it is ready to go, I'll send an email out to everyone. I'll attach the budget instructions. I will include on our website just a link to these recordings too that ISAC is posting, just, you know, so if you have someone in your office that you think would benefit from watching it, you know, that's an option as well. So, and then the budget instructions are going to include the calendar, the spreadsheet that I mentioned that'll help you on your own calculate the max basic levies. And then also one thing I would mention is that we will have sort of a, when I say we, I mean Ted and John and I will have sort of a live almost Q&A document or FAQ document that we're going to have on our website, and I'll have a link available to that. So as we get questions, we're going to continually update that document. So, you know, if you have a question, that might be a place that you can go to as a resource. And like I said, you know, as we get started with things, there'll be questions that we didn't anticipate that we'll hear, and we'll add those to the document too. So I think we're good to go. Please follow up with me as needed. And I really appreciate everybody's time today and all the good questions.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Amanda.